you say hi?
No, I usually just say welcome to the Moxie Press podcast.
But when I pick up the phone, I say hi. Okay. Welcome to the Moxie Press podcast. This is our first author spotlight of 2025.
Woo-hoo.
Woo! And we are changing it up a little bit. So this episode will be exactly the same as we have been doing for the last few. But if you subscribe to our newsletter, you will be getting some extra bonus spotlights throughout the month. I think still on Thursdays, we haven't named them yet as of December. We are recording this in the past. Mini spotlights or
trying to think what's like something in the spotlight.
Flashlights.
There you go. Yeah.
That's a little questionable on that one. But we will have it named by the time we send it out. But you'll be getting more authors. You'll be getting more stories, more poems, more creativity to read this year. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. Be sure to subscribe, like she said. Also, follow us on social for everything you want to do. Today's conversation with Mark Salzwedel is really cool. He is a man of many talents.
Oh my goodness.
You will be overwhelmed with his bio in a good way.
I feel like I don't do enough.
I know, it was really cool. It was really cool to hear. He's the person whose experiences I wish I had growing up. But I do appreciate my childhood. Whoever knew me then, I love it. But it's really cool, really nice. So check it out. And then, stay tuned for even more awesome content from us this year. Enjoy. Bye.
Battle for Kepler 3b was going badly for the humans. It took supplies 4 times as long to arrive from Earth than the relatively short trip from the Kepnerian homeworld. Human forces were spread mostly between deployment platforms orbiting the star and the massive dreadnoughts patrolling the planet's path. The drawn-out campaign meant the null gravity was taking its toll on the bone density, muscle tone, and fluid balance of the human soldiers. Leaves to spend time at the rear command center where centrifugal forces staved off many of the deleterious effects had long waiting lists. Down on the surface of Kepler 3b, gravity was half of Earth normal, but getting down to the planet's surface was hazardous. The Kepnerians' favorite strategy was to destroy any craft or drop pod descending through the atmosphere before it landed. Down on the rocky landscape dotted with mesas and eskers, humans held the larger open areas with their tanks and flak turrets. Kepnerians were deft climbers and picked off human patrols with their snipers when they wandered in among the tall rock formations to try to clear an enemy nest. They had what the scientists called contact empathy. They could communicate with each other instantly by touching. Greta A2998035 had started her military career fighting human pirates near Alpha Centauri. Somewhere around the time of the Second Cometary Wars, her faith in the exigency of military force in establishing peace and order had deteriorated. She saw entire colonies wiped out when massive balls of ice were redirected toward them. There was no honor among the widely spread humans anymore, and the Kepnerians she now fought on Kepler 3b showed no signs of distinguishing combatants from non-combatants either. Her squad had the record for the fewest casualties in a 26 cycle. The men and women that fought with her were tough, quick, and smart, but they were getting worn down and ragged as the war dragged into its 3rd year. "I think we are at a stalemate," Greta told her squad as they traveled to retrieve one of the few drop shipments that had made it through the Kepnerians' defense grid. "Until we get more reinforcements or better tech, it's all about holding our ground." When the 6 of them got to the landing site, they saw a Kepnerian patrol carefully descending one of the steeper eskers nearby. The humans quickly unloaded the supplies onto the rover, one keeping watch of the approaching Kepnerians. "Hey, Sergeant," one of the men called back to Greta. "They sent us chocolate chip cookies." Greta went over to inspect. Indeed, someone in command had thrown a box of cookies into the drop pod. Maybe it had been a joke, or maybe a half-hearted reward for 3 years of service. It gave her an idea. "Leave it," she ordered.
That was Mark Salzwedel with an excerpt from his short story, An Unexpected Cookie. Oh, our dog he's really into it. And you can get the entire short story if you subscribe to our newsletter, listeners and viewers. So pause this, go sign up, and then come back. Mark, you are our December author spotlight. Last one of the year. Congratulations.
It's my birthday month.
Oh, nice.
It's actually January.
It's actually January. Never mind. January spotlight.
So early birthday present.
Thank you. Everything blurs together these days. We were talking before this. We have 3 kids. We're losing our minds constantly. So to start, just so we can get to know you a little bit better, same with our viewers and listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Okay. Let's see. Grew up in the Midwest. Was born in Indiana and grew up in Wisconsin. And my parents always wanted us to try different things. And so I became sort of a polymath after a while. And I got good at a lot of different things, but had trouble deciding on what to do. And it finally got to my senior year in college when I finally decided that I wanted to pursue creative writing. But not a lot of jobs immediately getting out of college. I decided to work as an editor first. So I started work as a acquisitions editor for HarperCollins Publishers in their San Francisco office. And that was my first experience in book publishing, other than a short bit in a publishing house in the Twin Cities. And then I started doing a lot of freelance work, editing and writing, some journalism, and eventually ended up coming to New York about 20 years ago. And after a career in acting in Hollywood, and I started a board game company. It's called Strategic Space. It's all abstract strategy games and card games, and I ran that for about maybe 3 or 4 years. And then I got back into editing and writing, and I started working in advertising. I started taking music theory lessons from a choral composer I know, and started to get a little bit better at my composing work. Started writing operas and songs. I just sent one to a friend of mine that's got a band that she thought it would be good for, and things like that. And eventually I started in 2017, I published my first short story. It was called The Axe. It was about a teen inheriting the family's ancient battle axe that if you turn around with it in a circle once, it'll take you back in time one day, and some of the problems that causes. It's sort of humorous, actually. It's like this one that I read was. And then I managed to get another 5 or 6 short stories published before I got my first novel published 2 years ago. In 2022, I published a science fiction novel called The Lever, which had an all lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender cast. And it's been doing pretty well lately. It was on the part of a book buying bundle for Pride Month this year. So actually did very well there. It's gotten a lot of 5-star reviews. So it's doing very well. It's sort of a thriller. And then earlier this year, my second novel came out, which is more of a sort of urban fantasy in the magical realism style. So it's a little bit more spare on the magic, just one magical element. And deals with a family that's been blessed and cursed, a la Sleeping Beauty, and the Irish fairies that are at the heart of it all. So that brings me up to today. I've got several projects that are in the works, but we can talk more about that if you want.
That's quite a bio.
Yes.
I feel lazy. I could barely do one thing. I guess to start, going back to your short story, just because one, it kind of captures our imagination. It's nice to have something that is in one direction kind of it's hard sci-fi, like war, has a
Military
lot to do with
sci-fi.
like world building.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, has a very gentle touch to it.
Mhm.
It almost kind of spoke to us in that moment, being like it's a time of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to have something like this that portrays war in that light. What was your inspiration really for this story?
I have to say that I got a lot of the ideas for it from reading the Expanse novels.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I remember I had never read them, but I had seen the show a little bit, and it was really good. It's
Mhm.
really cool. One of the things that came to mind when, like, do you see it as sort of like a reflection? Like, I'm having a hard time wording this question for some reason because it doesn't roll off the tongue very elegantly.
Just in general, sci-fi is normally a
Yeah.
mirror to the anxieties of today or the time. Do you feel like this story aligns with that?
I don't know. The initial impetus was just to write a story about. I really love cookies, and I think they have amazing power. And I just was wondering what story would possibly make that the turning point in something really significant like a war. And so that's where I sort of got my inspiration for it. I guess as far as today, I hadn't really thought about how it reflects today's political landscape. I think mostly, I think there's sort of a lot more tribalism in the world, and that sort of encourages people to sort of subscribe to a groupthink. And I think Greta in this story actually shows that it's more important to be a little creative and try to think outside the box. I think it has more of that sense to it. I don't know. Did you have a sense that it had something more on the war angle?
Not for me, not necessarily the war angle. I just loved the freshness of her thought process behind the cookie.
Mm-hmm.
And I more used it like as a fantasy of the way that I wish things would be handled today. If that makes
Okay.
any sense.
Sure.
Yeah, I think part of it too is, one, like we kind of project our own. Son has an opinion on this. Or project our own sort of, I don't know, opinions or wishes onto it. The other thing that is stood out to me, at least, was just the idea. I guess going back to the gentleness of it, it does feel, one, unexpected, not to play on the title, but also, I don't know, like there's something about it that felt fresh, and that for me, just kind of, I guess it is the same thing, just kind of wish fulfillment in a way.
I'm gonna go check on him real fast.
I know for our listeners and viewers, you probably hear our child. He's trying to say occupied, but sometimes he gets a little. But we can continue talking.
That's
She'll be
fine.
back. One of the things I was wondering about too is you were going over all of the different things, and even before we started recording, all of the different hats that you wear and try and do and whatnot. I'm someone who wishes they could be a polymath. Do you have any advice for people who maybe would, like, they don't know where to start with things, they wish to get one thing done, much less, two or three things, like how to get into that mindset?
I think it's hard to change learning styles after you've gotten to be an adult. I think if you have when you're a child a lot of different inputs and you're encouraged to try a lot of different things, I think that gives you more opportunity to sort of expand your intellect in a way. And I think if you're sort of expected to just get one thing right all the time and finish one project before you go on to the next and things like that, that sort of makes it harder to have that sort of multi level focus.
Yeah, I think my issue is that I can stick on something for too long and be obsessed with perfecting it versus, getting it out of my system, moving on and seeing what comes of it later.
Yeah, what helps for me is that I have the ability to move from one project to another. If I don't feel particularly moved by one at the moment, I don't have to sort of force myself to do it. I can just move on to something else.
I mean, that's definitely the healthier POV, I think, too, is the ability to let go, for sure.
I see that you asked the question that you've been dying to ask.
One of them. I have a couple of questions, but they're just for me and people like me who want to write. I guess the other one, just to also address it, because, again, your short story is sci-fi. I am someone, I was just talking to Jesse about this, someone who wishes their brain would let them want to write sci-fi. I want to break into genre fiction. I want to be able to do that. But I think I get too intimidated. Not even just sci-fi. The world building, all that stuff. I feel like I have so much of a responsibility to create something unique and, I don't know, so specific to its own world. And not even just sci-fi, I think fantasy too, just any sort of thing like that. Do you have advice for people who might be also they want to do that, but they just can't find a way in?
I think the research and the planning and the writing are separate things. So that when I start writing, for instance, a science fiction story, I will have a premise and I will have at least a couple of the characters figured out. Do histories for the characters, what brought them to the inciting incident in the story. And then I will also talk about the history, what led them to be in this situation, both personally and the world that they're in, what created this circumstance. My first novel, for instance, started out as a short story. I wrote this short story about how this businessman had been abducted on his way to a meeting on the moon, and he finds that he's in a hospital wing on a satellite that's run by the military, and we find out over the course of the story that he's been starting to feel ever since he started taking genetic treatments for his diabetes, that he's been getting more submissive and having harder time making decisions, and that he's been more attracted to the same sex. And so it ends up being he ends up joining an all-male platoon aboard the satellite. I thought, that was okay as a short story, but it leaves all sorts of questions about the world building up. And so one by one, I tackle the issues. I say, well, why in the world would the army be abducting people? And one of the things I came up with was that the standard of life because technology had spread so much in the intervening centuries, that the standard of living had increased to the point where people were not having such big families anymore. And the population was actually going down, and there were fewer young people around. So when they're trying to recruit soldiers, they're having a harder time wrestling them from things like corporations that are also scrambling to get new hires and things like that, so that there's a real marketplace for young people. And so the military decides it's going to use its many-layered secrecy to do something a little immoral and start randomly changing the DNA of young people through their hacking genetic clinics in order to make them more willing to join the army. And things go on after that, okay, well, if that's happening, what else is happening? There has to be some reason that they're feeling so much in need to find more recruits. Well, then there has to be a threat of some kind. What would this threat be? if it were something that was out in the open, people would be volunteering. But if it was something covert that nobody else knew about, then they would be also recruiting more covertly. So then have to come up with the fact that it's not invasion, a physical invasion, but it's an alien AI that's invading Earth's computer systems.
See, that's why I wish my brain would.
I know. I was just thinking. I think your imagination is brilliant. Like I can't. I mean, I
Sure.
could make up little stories about bunnies that go to the store with my kids, but that's that's a whole nother level. That's amazing that you.
Well, my
I
father.
mean, I'm sure it takes time and.
It just takes practice, really. So my father was a psychologist, and he often taught creativity in his classes. And one of the things he did was he would give people a setting, a character, and an action, just randomly from this deck of things that he put together, and they would have to create a story from that. And that sort of prompt writing is always a good way to start to learn how to solve those sort of problems. So it's just a matter of practice.
Yeah, I'm personally definitely out of practice. So something we found through a lot of our interviews with our spotlights is that a lot of us have an acting or theater background.
By the way,
it's very strange. So we met in college for I have a musical theater degree. Very what's the word?
Useful. Yeah, I just have a acting degree. They didn't want to hear me sing.
But so many people that we have spoken to either, did theater in high school or have that specific creativity bug.
Yeah, no, I was also a performer too.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That's cool.
I was
what did you do, and how do you use that in your writing?
I started theater when I was 7 years old. I went to an experimental primary school, and they had a theater program, and I was in plays when I was 7 and 10 and 9. I was actually in a college production of something, and when I got to college, I started a sort of an undeclared minor in theater. Took directing classes and scene design classes and dance classes, and performed in, I think, 3 or 4 plays, did voice acting for an animated film and things like that. And so I got out of college, and of course I went into modeling. But eventually I got into doing community theater in the Twin Cities. And when I got transferred to San Francisco, I started doing small theater works there. I joined the Playwright Center in San Francisco, and I was directing and acting in stage readings there. Actually staged a musical of mine called Moving In, about 4 roommates at the Blue Bear Theater in Fort Mason, San Francisco, several years ago. I worked with a friend on a musical. I was the book writer for a musical about what's her name? Gorbachev.
I can't think.
Wife of Mikhail.
Yes. I don't know her name off the top of my head, but I know who you're talking about.
Yes. So
that's so cool.
Yeah. So things like that.
Wow, that's wonderful.
But
and then
I actually I worked in Hollywood for quite a while when I was in LA. Worked on several large roles on small productions and small roles on large productions. There and in New York, I did a lot of background work and small roles. I worked on Boardwalk Empire for about 4 years. That was my biggest employer here in New York when I was working in acting.
That's so cool. Yeah, we did theater in LA a lot. And so it's funny. Yeah, I did theater with a company called Open Fist. And one of their... Yeah, oh, cool. That's awesome. Yeah. And so a couple of their people also came from San Francisco and stuff, had, I think, a very similar trajectory to you. I guess we all just find each other. I don't know what it is about it. That's really great. How do you think it's probably obvious, but it's really informed your creative process, having, dipped your toes in so many different things. Most of us don't even get to attempt writing a musical, let alone directing or even just writing a play, period, before we do other things. But I feel like you have so many different things you've done.
Well, they cross-pollinate each other to a certain extent. I think if you're an actor or performer, you're more likely to have embodied different characters over time. And that means that you have a very useful skill for writing fiction, because the biggest problem that a lot of fiction writers who don't have that background have is that all their characters talk the same.
Yes.
Or they act the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have that background in performing, you have more of an idea of how different the characters have to be, and you focus on that more. So that's really helpful. I think for my opera work, for instance, it calls on my composing work and my poetry work, because I do rhyming lyrics in the libretto, and calls on my dramatic work to make sure I'm following a good dramatic arc in the story, that I'm sufficiently knowing my singing background. I have to know, what sort of stuff is going to challenge an opera singer. Does it have all the right bells and whistles that a diva soprano is going to want to sing? That sort of thing. So yeah, they definitely anything in the entertainment field, whether it's writing or artistry or performing or anything like that, all has cross uses for the skills.
I think that's that's probably just good advice for anybody trying to be a better writer, is at least try those things. You don't have to be good at any of them. You can audition for a play, you can write a play on your own and see what happens.
Reading plays.
That's true. Even just reading plays. Dialogue and character and how that forms in like real time versus I think just for anybody listening and watching, try things. You don't have to
that, and the questions or the things that you said that your father would give are improv suggestions.
Right.
The place, the scenario,
That's
the
true.
conflict, or whatever.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have any other advice for people who might want to start writing or having a hard time finishing things? We've had some guests on here who want to pursue it more. Even, for example, we've kind of run the gamut on anybody. Do you have any advice for them?
Well, I think it took me a long time to recognize that writing fiction is an apprenticeship. And not all of us have like a master writer that is nurturing our path, but it is in many ways an apprenticeship. And so what we get, instead of a master bringing us along, we have books. If you read books, you learn how books are constructed after a while and what's a satisfying narrative. So read lots of books, read books by people that have won awards, read books by people that write in a totally different style than you usually read. Read nonfiction books to see what that writing style is like. Just be really immersed in that so that you get a sense of seeing the world that way, that you get an idea of what the world of creating a story is. You have an inciting incident that has to occur fairly early in the story by modern standards. You have to pick a style. Is it first-person narrative or is it third-person narrative? Or do you mix narratives? Do you have one point of view? Do you have several points of view? What fits best in this particular story? And then just start writing. Start small if you want to. Start writing 1,000 words. Do flash fiction and just get that down. That's writing a scene, basically. And then if you get really good at writing scenes, then you can put scenes together and you have a novelette or a novella or even a novel at that point. And I have to say that I don't remember who it was that said it, but he said he wrote close to 1 million words before he ever got published. I think that's part of it as well. As I'm sure I had penned at least 600,000 words before I ever got published. That means I had written 5 novels before my 6th finally got published. So you got to be willing to put a lot of your hard effort into a file for a while, wait to see if people want to publish it later.
Yeah.
Because a lot of your first works are not going to be saleable because you're learning at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that makes
I
sense.
love that. I love that.
Too. Where can people find your work?
Well, my website has links to all of my writing.
Nice.
It's marksalzwedel.com.
And we'll link that in the episode description.
Thank you. If you search for my novels, they're available just about everywhere. It's The Lever and The Miraculous Life of Rupert Rocket. Those are the two titles. And different types of reads. The Lever is more of a sort of a thriller. Each chapter is sort of like has lots of cliffhangers and stuff like that. And the Miraculous Life of Rupert Rocket is more of a episodic thing. So each chapter is sort of like self-contained in a way, but there is an overall arc.
And then, because we talked about it a little bit in our correspondence, do you want to tell anybody about your upcoming novel, Time Bump?
Yes. Time Bump, that should be coming out next year. That's a non-sequential novel. So you start with the first novel, or the first chapter that appears in the novel is chapter 10.
Wow.
And then the one after that, I think, is chapter 4, and then 7, and then 27, and then 1, I think, is the 8th chapter. So
naturally.
Yeah. No, but that's to be able to read it in two different ways. You can read it in numerical order, or you can read it in the order that it's presented. And I've had people read it both ways, and they find that it hangs together both ways. It's kind of interesting because the mixed up order gives you a little bit more of a sense of the paradoxical nature of the main character's experiences. As he's moving through time, he's seeing himself in different time periods, both the future and the past all the time. He's running into himself.
That's really cool. Wow. So hopefully, so it's coming out next year. So we'll be sure. Please remind us and send us a link, and we'll send it to our subscribers so they can pre-order it when it's ready.
Sure. Thank you.
I think that's it. I think our son is trying to get our attention, but also thank you for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it. Had a lovely chat.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. And thank you so much.
Okay.